Hello and welcome to another episode of Be the Bank. My name's Robert Hytha, your host, founder of FIXnotes. And on this show, I bring to you my knowledge of the secondary mortgage market. Today's an important episode because we're talking about due diligence, comprehensive due diligence from the top to the bottom. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. Let's get into it. And we're gonna go through the non-performing waterfall evaluation that you may have seen before if you watch the show. It's a little blurry now, and we're gonna reveal the steps of this process as we go. So let's start right away with the first piece of this, the secured versus unsecured determination. Whether or not the loan that you're buying is secured by real property or is an unsecured liability to that borrower. And this is an important factor because it's the biggest driver of pricing right off the bat. If it's a secured loan, it could go for close to par value. That's the percentage of unpaid principal balance. On the other hand, if it's unsecured, it might be worth 0.5%, 50 basis points, or even less than that sometimes. So first thing we're gonna talk about is how to determine when a property is secured to a loan. And the way we do that is by looking at public records for the property owner. Now, if the property owner matches the borrower on the data tape, then we can be pretty sure that that property secures the interests that we're looking at. There's a collateral property that's protecting the lien that we're investing in or potentially investing in. We're doing our due diligence process. So how does the lien actually become secured? Unsecured rather, and that is through the senior lien foreclosure process. An unsecured lien essentially means if it was a mortgage at one point, it means that that borrower no longer owns the property, and they may have lost the property through the senior lien foreclosure process or through a tax deed sale or foreclosure sale or sheriff sale, and they no longer own the subject collateral. Now, once a loan is unsecured, there's a second factor here, and that's the personal liability. When a loan is unsecured, the borrower has signed a promissory note and they still owe the money. However, the statute of limitations or a discharge bankruptcy can actually remove the personal liability. So then an unsecured loan is potentially uncollectible and not worth anything. So we'll shift back over to the secured side. And there is an important thing to think about with regards to false positives and negatives in the situation. So when you look at these different methods for determining property ownership, like using protitle.com or protitleiusa.com/order, which is a great free tool you can use before you even order a title report to see the estimated property owner on title. You can also use DataTree, the dashboard there. If you remember, if you sign up for DataTree, you actually get that as a free search as well. You can see who the property owner is on public record on title, or you can go right to the county public records. And if you see that the borrower name in the county record matches the borrower name in your data tape of the loan information on the asset that you're looking to purchase, then you can be pretty confident that it's secured. However, there's such thing here as a false positive. And a false positive is a situation where even though the borrower still owns the property, the lien is no longer secured. So one potential there is that the lien has been released, which you can also find that on the public records. And in that case, that would mean that there is no mortgage anymore that exists, and that would be something you bring up to your seller. But there's also false negatives. And these are interesting situations because there's a lot of value to be added here as a note investor in your due diligence process. If you find a loan where the borrower no longer owns the property, but you look at the deed that was used to transfer the property away from your borrower, and you find it is subject to. So QCD is quit claim deed, and if it is subject to your existing lien, then your mortgage can actually still be secured even though the borrower no longer owns the property. Essentially, you'd be enforcing the mortgage, your security instrument, against the collateral owned by a different borrower. And you can show, and it won't be your borrower, they'll be the property owner at that point, but you can show them the public records that they bought that property subject to the mortgage that was owed by the seller to them, our borrower. And also another potential false positive and negative is using services like the DataTree dashboard or the ProTitle USA service. These are delayed data, sometimes 30 days or longer after the public records change. Do these services reflect these updates? So by going directly to the county public records, you can be a little bit more confident that you're seeing the most up-to-date, most recent information. So once we've determined that a property is secured, the mortgage note is secured by the real estate, we can move on to the next step here. And that is Is it a first lien or a second lien? And for the most part, first lien versus second lien is something that your seller is going to tell you before you even start your due diligence process. This is a field on the data tape which says what position the loans are in. First liens, senior liens, or second liens, junior liens. And this is another pretty big driver of price. And the main delimiter here is when we value first liens, we're typically valuing based on the fair market value of the home as a percentage discount to the collateral value versus second liens where we're valuing as a percentage discount based on the unpaid principal balance. So that's where we see these pretty rough value ranges. They're pretty large, but 7 to 84% of value is where we're seeing the current market now with a cap on the unpaid principal balance. So even if you're paying 80% of the fair market value, if that 80% is more than 100% of the unpaid principal balance, then we apply a cap there, a max formula in Excel to make sure that we're not paying more than the amount that's actually owed on the loan. Whereas with second liens, we're pricing between about 5.25% to 75% of the unpaid principal balance. And the wide ranges are in the beginning of this waterfall because as we determine the different scenarios, as we go down this waterfall list, we refine the price. And if we see positive results on some of these next steps, then it's going to be higher on these percent ranges. So let's talk about why first liens, I believe, are a better investment than second liens. So on the senior lien side, we're talking higher due diligence expenses, $250 to $500, even more sometimes in your due diligence. These can be wiped out by taxes or a homeowners association lien, especially in super lien states where HOAs can be a little bit more of a risk. Now, if you Google super lien states, you can find those exact states. And I believe if you go back to our episode 30, which was really specific, junior versus senior, you can get a little bit more information on that. Now, property-centric resolutions are the reason why in senior liens, we often value them based on the fair market value over the unpaid principal balance. When you have a property-centric resolution, that essentially means that you're more likely going to be taking back the collateral in senior lien situations versus junior, where we more often resolve with the borrower. Now, you have something called forced place insurance as a lender to make sure that the borrower is insured on the property, then the lender is insured if the borrower does not have property insurance. Now, one second here, let's take a look at the fish and the birds are in, wow, there's just a lot going on right now. I saw the koi are hanging out waiting for some food, and I poked my head out the window and saw all of those little house sparrows. So I wanted to share that with you before we go on to the last step of the junior lien. The last reason why I believe that it's not as good of an investment as junior liens. It's more expensive to buy a single senior lien, and the collateral is often lower quality. The loans that reach the secondary market that are secured in first position are often secured by properties that are $100,000 values or less. Whereas in junior liens, we're seeing $250,000 and more collateral values securing our investments. So on the junior lien side, we're seeing $50 to $200 of due diligence expenses, so less money per asset when you're doing your research. They can be wiped out by the senior taxes or the homeowners association, but at the same time, because they can be wiped out by the senior, you've got basically like the block and the tackle in front of you. You've got a defender. The senior lien holder is defending everybody below them's lien position by making sure taxes are paid and homeowners association bills don't go into default. Whereas in senior lien, you're the one making sure taxes and HOAs are paid. Whereas juniors, you've kind of got that additional level of security of the senior lien kind of working in your behalf in that way. A lot of borrower-centric resolutions for junior liens, which means we can tap into emotional equity where these junior lien holders have, the junior lien borrower has a lot invested in the property, in the community, and they want to make sure they get the property paid off, these loans resolved or back on track. And there's a lot greater discounts with junior liens. It's easier to diversify when you're buying second position loans. So just at a high level here, first lien investors need to be prepared for more REO situations, higher capital requirements, and more involved portfolio monitoring. Whereas second liens offer greater diversity, more autonomy, better protection, and a less expensive research process. So that's why I believe that smart money prefers seconds. So let's go on to the next phase of the due diligence waterfall, and that is collateral value. So on the senior lien side, we're looking at lower property values as basically subsets. Now, we generally create tranches within our collateral value on the first lien side, where we're looking at like sub $10,000 value properties, which are often vacant land, moving up to 10 to about 25,000, 25,000 to 50, 50,000 to 75, 75 to 100, and 100 and up. And generally the lower value band properties are worth substantially less as a percentage of the property value. On the other hand, with second liens, we typically see these higher value collateral, like I mentioned in the last slide, higher value loans, higher value actual collateral that's securing these loans. $250,000 and more often is the average for the property value on the second lien side. Now, determining the property value is such an important factor of your due diligence process. And I believe that there are a wide spectrum of ways that you can analyze the property value. On the free but less accurate end of the spectrum, we're looking at AVMs, automated valuation models like Zillow, Zestimate, Trulia, ePraisal, Homes.com, the Chase Home Valuator. Just Google any of those and you can pull up the website and search an address and get a potential value. Now we have paid AVMs like the Atom AVM, the CoreLogic Geo AVM, or the House Canary products, which give you a little bit more assurance, a little bit more honing in on the value with comps. But I believe one step above that, using recently sold comps and doing your own manual review is the best possible way to balance the expense with the time investment, to actually spend nothing doing the work, but a little bit of your time to get the accurate comps in that market to have the same size, same beds and baths, same general geography, and then determining what your property that's securing the loan you're looking at is worth based on the relevant market. You can look at loans that have been sold or have been recently listed and hone in on a value there. You also want to make sure you look at a recent Google Street View as well, so that you can determine whether or not the property is in worse condition than the neighboring properties based on those images. Now, a desktop appraisal by a professional is a little bit more accurate than what you do yourself, but I believe that you guys are all aspiring mortgage note professionals, real estate professionals that can do just as good of a job as a professional who's not going to the property themselves. And that's what makes the difference between a BPO, broker price opinion. This is boots on the ground, a realtor or a broker going to that property, taking some photos and doing their own evaluation of the marketplace in their local marketplace, so they maybe have some more information that you don't have being a member of that local community. So that's more expensive, around $100 or so to order a broker price opinion. And I believe for the most part, you're gonna be fine with your own research. And then maybe when you're buying these more expensive notes, especially in first position, you can move up and order some BPOs. And just as an aside here, we do not use broker price opinions on really any of the junior liens. We do a lot of broker price opinions on senior liens. And look at that, there's a little red bird out there. I think that's like a purple finch. What a cutie. And some fish. Always got to look at the wildlife to keep the blood pressure low as we talk numbers and collateral valuation methods. All right, so let's jump over to how to run your own desktop appraisal, just to give you guys an idea on how to do this yourself. So first off, go to Zillow.com. The seller landing pricing tool has some really great information all laid out for you really nicely. Basically what you're seeing here is the side-by-side comparison of different properties that are comparable. You're seeing beds and baths, square footage, what year it was built, the lot size, as well as the price and if it was sold recently or recently listed. So very, very cool process tool to get your information quickly. So after you've done that, another option is to find the subject, review similar recently sold homes. And you can do that by scrolling down to the bottom of a Zillow listing and see the loans, the properties that have been sold recently that look and feel similar to your property. So that's another great way. And I believe there's an option 3 here, and that is to find the subject property on the map and then select the toggle for sold loans, not for sale. So if you click that yellow toggle for sold, then you'll see all these little yellow dots and you can see how close they are to your subject property. And you can get an eyeball on how big the lot is and what kind of, if it's a corner lot or if it's across the street from a park, that kind of thing. You can put that all together to determine your value. So make sure that you consider a couple things here. Consider the location, the square footage of the lot and the home, the beds and baths, the sold date, and the construction date. And when you look at Google Street View, confirm the image capture date in the bottom right-hand corner, then check the condition of the subject property and the surrounding homes. See if you see tarps on the roof or overgrown lawns, and you can do a lot of information. You can use that information to really get an idea on the area. So here's a street view, and you'll see in the corner there, this was image capture July 2011. So there we go. This is 10 plus years ago at this point. We have to take this with a grain of salt. And that is it for how to run your own desktop appraisal. Let's jump back over to the waterfall evaluation and move on to the next category, which is bankruptcy. Now, in the senior lien side, we're looking at the bankruptcy chapter and the current status, whereas in the junior lien side, where there's a possibility to have your lien stripped in the bankruptcy, we need to also be looking at equity, a possible motion for relief filed by the senior lien holder in the docket. So here's an overview of that bankruptcy process. First, Chapter 7. Chapter 7s are what's called a liquidation of debt. And there's an equity limit of around $23,000 on your homestead property. So the borrower's income must be low enough to pass a means test, and there's typically 3 to 5 months until you are discharged. So in a Chapter 7, the trustee is selling all the non-exempt property, the things that aren't owner occupied, the properties that aren't really required for the borrower to live, and those are used to pay the creditors. So Chapter 7s are generally a little bit better for note investors in one sense of the word, because you do not have the risk of getting your lien stripped without a little bit more of a process. Whereas in Chapter 13, which is a reorganization of debt, the borrower actually can have a much larger amount of unsecured debt, up to $394,000 of unsecured or $1.18 million of secured debt. And this process discharges the bankruptcy when the planned payments are all complete. So whereas the Chapter 7 is discharged very early, the Chapter 13 can go on for years until all the creditors have been received all of their monthly payments through the trustee. Now, the problem with that Chapter 13 is that you can lose your lien position. A junior lien, which is not protected by any equity, can be stripped or crammed down in the voluntary petition. You'll see that under the Schedule D. And that's what we're going to look at right here, the tactical approach to analyzing bankruptcy situations as a note investor. So first off, look up the Social Security number on pacer.gov case locator. You'll find a case. If the borrower has filed bankruptcy, you can click through and go to the history and documents. This is the docket of all of the filings for that bankruptcy. Now you're going to be looking for schedules and motions, especially motion to release or motion to cram down. There's a couple there. So first though, on the voluntary petition, you'll click through to that specific document. It's normally the first document that's been filed in a bankruptcy, and find the Schedule D. That's a schedule of all of the secured claims. Now it's nice to skim through A through C as well. You're going to see the borrower's income and expenses and unsecured claims and all that. But Schedule D, secured claims, is where we're going to find our lien, the subject lien that you're doing your due diligence on, or maybe you already own the loan and you're making sure that the bankruptcy is proceeding as you'd expect. And you want to make a note of the collateral value and the senior lien balance. This is particularly if you're in junior position. Now, if the senior lien balance is more than the collateral value that the borrower has evidenced as the value of the home, then you're at risk in a Chapter 13 of being stripped or crammed down. Whereas if the senior lien is less than the collateral value, then you have equity, and it's very unlikely that you're going to be stripped or crammed down in that situation. Now, if the collateral value is way lowballed, it's way less than you think that property is actually worth, then you do want to have an attorney file a motion to revalue the collateral to make sure that you are not put in a position where you could be crammed down because of negative equity. Now, finally, if you keep scrolling, you'll find the borrower intentions regarding the subject property. If it's owner occupied, it's likely that they're going to retain the home and continue making payments. But if it's an investment property, their intention might be to sell the property and pay off the creditors. So you want to make a note of that. And then finally, check on an order for the motion for relief from stay. Essentially, that's part of the docket. It won't be part of the voluntary petition. It's a separate filing. And basically, it's what a lien holder will file in order to foreclose on a property that's currently in the bankruptcy process. Essentially, when a bankruptcy is filed, there is a stay in place. A stay means that nobody can foreclose or file any legal. They have to work through the bankruptcy. But if a motion for relief from stay is granted, then the lien holder can pursue foreclosure even though the bankruptcy is currently ongoing. So if you're a junior lien holder and you see that the senior lien has been approved for their motion for relief from the stay, then you can very well expect that that senior lien is going to start their foreclosure process. And you want to make a note of that. All right, so let's zoom back out, back to the non-performing waterfall evaluation and move on to the next step here, which is occupancy. So both sides here, we really want to know if it's owner occupied, tenant occupied, or vacant. What is the situation here? And it definitely factors into the bankruptcy process, but it also factors into just emotional equity and the borrower's likelihood of making payments on an account. So we do this occupancy research by triangulating the potential occupancy through a variety of different sources. So although an unknown result is still possible due to unavailable information, the more data points you've compared, the better. Owner occupancy increases the likelihood of a successful resolution to these non-performing loans that we're looking at. Vacancy may result in a deferred maintenance, township fees, violations, and strategic default. So it's not good to see a property that's vacant. And tenant occupied isn't quite as good as owner occupied, but it is better than a vacant property. So a couple data sources to look at. County tax records will have an address where they mail the tax bill. So if that address matches the collateral address, it's good. I could think that it's most likely owner occupied. Your bankruptcy petition, if the borrower has filed bankruptcy, will have an address on it as well. See if it matches. Just a simple Google search can often give you lookup information on a specific homeowner or a specific property that you can triangulate. You'll also be able to look at social media sometimes to see if the borrower has a social media account that shows where they are located, and if it's the same town or same city, maybe it is likely owner occupied. Credit reports normally have 3 addresses on them with dates, so you know the most recent address is likely where they live, and if it matches the collateral address, it's owner occupied. And then finally, a skip trace can be super useful and probably the best triangulation data point we have here to look at a borrower's skip trace report to see where they're paying the utility bills and where they're getting their mail. So skip trace is great. And you can also use the skip trace to search a specific property and see if maybe it isn't owner occupied, but rather tenant occupied. Now, some potential results here, it's either owner occupied or non-owner occupied to start. You don't really know if it's non-owner occupied, if it's vacant, or tenant occupied. You just know that the owner lives somewhere else. But then you can refine that a little bit more by finding, especially through skip trace, whether it's a vacant property or it's tenant occupied, or maybe it's a second home, a vacation home of your borrower. So really important to understand occupancy, because then you have an idea on what the next steps of the resolution process are going to be. So waterfall valuation, we're moving quite along here, and we're going to jump down to the first lien side of the next step, which is title. Are there other liens and judgments? And did you confirm the assignment chain? So back in episode 34, we talked all about title reports, and we went through this actual sample title report. It's called an O&E, or Ownership and Encumbrance Report, on ProTitle USA. So you can check that out and actually look at the report, or go back to episode 30 and I'll walk you through the entire report myself. But essentially here, the ownership and encumbrance report is a more cost-effective way to check title than a full title search. It's about $90 to order an O&E, and a title search can cost several hundred. Now, the difference with a full title is you can actually insure title if you have a company that runs the entire process, and they're also a title insurance company. But the O&E is just a way easier way, way cheaper, way faster to just get an idea on what's on title. Now, this O&E report essentially reviews public records through the last property transfer versus a 30-year review of a full title search. So it's quicker and easier. And it often also includes property taxes, homeowners association, and other potential liens. I really like ProTitle service because they not only provide the PDF that includes property taxes and HOA details, but it also provides an Excel sheet that you can merge into your data tape to get all that information already populated in a spreadsheet. Super useful. So this is most often utilized when purchasing senior liens or high value juniors. I will be honest, most of the juniors we buy, we do not order O&E. We do kind of our own cursory title review by looking at public records manually. So that's kind of this next point. Online public records offer the comparable manual research, and you can do that independently. And then finally, O&E data from vendors like ProTitle USA give you that spreadsheet, which I mentioned I really like. So let's move on to the next phase, which is on the junior lien side here, first lien status. Whether or not the senior lien in front of your junior is foreclosure initiated, delinquent, they're rolling payments, or maybe they're currently making payments as agreed. So looking at a credit report here, we're gonna find a trade line for the senior lien. Now, if you go back to episode 35, I actually review a credit report with you, and essentially what you'll find there is the senior lien has an origination date, which is part of the trade line, that's earlier than the junior lien. And when you find that trade line, which you'll see the creditor, the amount that's owed, the monthly payments that are due, and you'll also see a payment string. And the payment string will be a series of 12 numbers representing the last 12 months of the borrower's track record. If it's current, it's all ones. And it's also called as agreed, which means they're paying as agreed. 1 means every single month they're making their payment on time. 2 means they're 30 days late. So a semi-current senior lien would essentially mean that they are rolling 30 days late, making their 30-day due payment today. So they're late, but they're making their payments late consistently. A 60-day rolling payment essentially means they're 3 months behind, but they're making that 3-month payment every single month. So they're not caught up, but they are consistent. Now, delinquent is when we get to 4s and 5s, which 4 is 90 days late, and then 5 is 120 days late, or even foreclosure initiated. And since these are reviewed in reverse order from right to left, we can see that 12 months ago, they were current, 30 days late, 30 days late. Oh, they caught up with the double payment. They missed a payment. They caught back up again. And then look, they slipped 2, 3, 4, 5. This borrower was not making payments since 6 months ago and is now in a foreclosure process potentially. And often when you'll see all 5s, that means the foreclosure process has been going on for over a year. And also you'll see a remark often called foreclosure collateral sold, which needs to be confirmed with the secured scrub that we talked about in the first step of the waterfall. But essentially, this means that the borrower no longer owns the collateral and there is no security instrument protecting this particular note. So a few other things to look at: the balance of the loan, the past due amount that's owed, so you can add them up and get the payoff amount, the payment amount, which is how much they're making every monthly payment, and finally the reported date, which is critical because if this has been reported 2 years ago, then all this data you're looking at is stale anyway. So you want to make sure the reported date of the trade line is within maybe 60 days, so you know you're looking at fresh data. And then there's a bunch of other things that credit reports are useful for. FICO factors, which is your credit score and what goes into that, your occupancy status, like we mentioned before, employment details. Most credit reports will show where the borrower is employed. You also have public records, which show things like bankruptcy. And finally, lifestyle and spending. When you look at a credit report, you can get an idea of a borrower's their style of living. Are they financing a vehicle? Do they have medical debt? What's going on with their credit cards? So you can see much more than just a senior lien status, and this is an important part of your underwriting process. All right, so let's move on to the next phase of the due diligence waterfall, which on the senior lien side is taxes, the status, the balance, and the redemption deadline. So doing property tax research is especially important for senior liens because on senior liens, you're often resolving through the property and your equity position is directly reduced by the amount of unpaid taxes that are owed. It also reveals the future liability of the asset's secured status if the taxes are on their way to a sheriff's sale for being unpaid. So best case scenario here, when you go to the county tax, you'll see a bill and it'll show you exactly what's going on, complete records. The best case, honestly, is that all the taxes are paid, or at least the current year is the only year that's unpaid and we haven't hit the deadline yet. But even still, it's still a best case scenario if all that data is there and you're able to determine what the updated equity position is based on the unpaid tax situation. So that's the best case, is having all the information. A little less ideal is when there's limited records online and you need to call on the phone, like the old days, the county tax assessor or the collector and get an idea on the unpaid balance of that specific property. And then the worst case is when there is a sheriff's sale already ongoing. So you can check the property tax deeds or certificates in public records to determine whether or not the delinquent taxes have been sold and that foreclosure process has already started. So a couple of different vendors you can use for this. ProTitle USA, like I mentioned, their O&E report has tax data. Some counties require certification, which just takes a couple extra days. But for many counties, you'll get the tax data on the O&E report that they deliver within a week. CoreLogic has a residential tax solutions product, which you can't really use on a one-off basis. It's really for bulk volume. But then First American Tax Source is a more one-off service you can access through DataTree or using their API. So just 3 vendors that you can use to research property taxes. So a little bit more information here. When property taxes are delinquent and you already own the loan, you need to learn how to protect your secured interest, or if you haven't purchased it yet, to price it properly. So if you're already in due diligence and your seller has represented the taxes as current and they're actually not current, then you need to apply pricing fades because of that delinquency status, which essentially means you need to recalculate the equity and then you need to reassess your bid based on the updated equity position. And if it's delinquent and headed to foreclosure, you can expect that the tax balance will continue to increase and you can bake in some of those costs into your purchase price. If you net out the delinquent taxes from the fair market value, like I mentioned, that changes your equity position and you can recalculate. And then finally, negotiate with the seller to potentially bring the taxes current. Some loan sellers will pay the taxes prior to moving forward, especially if they've told you that, hey, the taxes are current, there's a zero balance owed, and you show them that that's not true. If they want to stand behind their original statement, then they'll pay the property taxes for you to move forward with the sale. And then finally, if you already own the loan, you need to understand the specific county's process. There's tax certificates and tax deeds. There's a redemption period surrounding that. So you need to understand by calling them and talking to the sheriff or the tax collector to understand what the steps are in their tax process. Especially knowing the redemption period, because that's the deadline, and it essentially means that if the taxes have been sold already and they're headed to the foreclosure, they can be redeemed by the lien holder or the borrower before they reach the end of the line there and you lose the property, it becomes unsecured. So if a payment is necessary, you can work with your loan servicer to make sure that the tax bill is applied to the balance owed on the loan. Essentially, it's called a recoverable advance. The lender can advance property taxes and then the borrower will have to pay that into the future. And if it's foreclosed, that'll be part of the payoff balance that's owed by that borrower. All right, so we're almost through the waterfall here. We're moving on to the last step, which is equity. And this is really important for second liens and first liens, but we're going to look at this from the second lien perspective based on full, partial, or no equity. And you value this based on the fair market value of the home minus the senior lien balance and any unpaid taxes or HOA bills that you can find. But generally, we just look at senior lien and the value of the property and see if that deduction is more than the junior. So this is a really awesome equity formula that we put together to determine whether it's underwater, no equity, partial equity, or full equity. And essentially when you're looking at a large data tape of loans and you're seeing numbers instead of just really, really easy to understand stratifications here, it can be difficult when it's just numbers. So what we like to do is first calculate equity coverage. It's a simple formula: fair market value minus the senior lien UPB, or rather the payoff balance, divided by the junior UPB. And you can see here what this will essentially tell you is how much equity divided by the amount that is owed to your junior lien as a second position investor. So let's say the senior, let's say the fair market value is 100,000, the senior is 50, and the junior is 50. Then this equals 1. Equity coverage equals 1. 100 minus 50 is 50. Divided by 50 is 1. And in that situation, we'd be not looking at that great of a deal. In this case, it would be if equity coverage, actually this formula should say if equity coverage is less than or equal to 1, then we're going to call it partial equity. So it kind of looks like a full equity deal, but to be conservative, if it's 1, we're going to call that partial equity. And on the other hand, if it's less than negative 0.25, we're calling it underwater. If it's less than 0.25, we're saying no equity, and then we mentioned the partial equity. And then finally, if the equity coverage is greater than 1, it's full equity. So here's an example there. Fair market value is 200,000, senior lien is 100, and the junior is 50. So 200 minus 100 is $100,000 divided by 50,000 is 2. So an equity position coverage of 2 means that we're able to fully cover our equity, and you can see this basically visualization of it here, where the senior UPB and the junior UPB combined can fall into a partial equity if they're 100%, and above 100% is where we see this full equity. Now, if this is something interesting to you and you want to know more, next episode in our upcoming next month's episode, we're going to be reviewing all about Excel, and this is going to be one of the formulas that we'll actually calculate together on a spreadsheet. Or you can go back to episode 36 where we talked about this in more detail as well. So that wraps up the non-performing waterfall evaluation. This is the complete waterfall from top to bottom. You can go through all of these steps and determine exactly what the status is of the asset that you are reviewing. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about this, the Mortgage Note Mastermind is where you can really hone your skills, learn this from actual practical application. And we'll talk about the Mortgage Note Mastermind in just a minute after we mention assets for sale. So some assets for sale that we have available are all listed on the aggregated trade desk for Mortgage Note Mastermind members. And in 2022, so far, we've facilitated the sale of $8.6 million of non-performing first and second position mortgage notes exclusively to our Mortgage Note Mastermind members. So before the end of the year, we have an additional $5+ million of non-performing loans that will be listed to our members. So I'd highly encourage you to join today. The Mortgage Note Mastermind is the best value network in the industry. There's 2 seats currently left at $140 per month, and that's going to give you access to these purchase opportunities, our masterclass courses, the private events that we run, the monthly Zoom calls, vendor databases, forums, activity feeds, case study details. I mean, there's so much here. I'm not going to read them all, but there are 3 spots for every price bracket until we move up to the next price. So once these 2 seats are filled at $140, then we move up to the next 3 at $150 per month. Here's the current masterclass courses that are available: Secrets to Sourcing, Bulk Due Diligence, and 90-Day Note Investor. So these are all included for free for Mastermind members and can really get you into the tactical approach of sourcing loans for sale, analyzing loans, and really getting from $0 to $1,000 per month of passive income in 90-Day Note Investor. So we've done tons of members only call recordings now. So you can get on our Zoom calls and hear from members and experts in the business on their experience in this business and things that they've learned along the way. A lot of great content there. So I would highly recommend that you go check out the mastermind group at FIXnotes.com/mastermind. Get in those 2 seats left before it goes up to $150 per month. So without further ado, let's go on to the next phase here, which is tech tips. We're gonna review the tech stack that makes this business work from anywhere in the world. And using a capable computer, a decent phone, and fast network to the internet, and all of these web services, we're able to run this business from anywhere. Podio for our CRM, Pacer for bankruptcy reviews, Citrix Podio workflow automation to make our Podio system more automated, Right Signature for contracts, Gmail all the time, Zapier to connect various web services like Right Signature back to our Podio workspace, CoreLogic for bulk due diligence, DataTree for loan level due diligence, Zillow for that one-off collateral research, ProTitle USA for title reports, and then we've got Google Sheets or Excel, and then finally TransUnion for credit reports, and TLO XP for your skip trace services. All right, so that is it for the tech stack. Let's jump over to our case study. First case study of the day is a non-performing first lien secured by a mobile home. And we resolved this one with a full payoff of $4,445. Now, this particular deal started at a fair market value of $62,121. We had $0 in taxes owed, which left us that full fair market value as our equity, $62,000, protecting $4,000. And we bought this non-performing loan for $1,250, which worked out to about 28% of the unpaid principal balance. So as you know, there's 3 questions we ask the borrowers to get into these resolution situations. What happened? Where are you now? And what do you want to do? And the answers to those questions can help us craft a win-win resolution. So in this case, the borrower was in rehab for alcoholism, and the borrower's sister told us that he may end up in the hospital. It's a pretty serious situation. So fortunately, the sister was helping out, and they got the last back taxes paid. 3 years of back taxes were brought current, and they quit claimed the deed from the borrower to the borrower's sister. Since she was a little more responsible of taking care of the property, she was now the owner on record. And this is a great example of what we talked about earlier in this episode, secured versus unsecured. If you pulled this loan up in the public record, it may look unsecured because the borrower does not match the owner on title. But if you look at the transfer type of the last deed instrument, you can see it was a quitclaim deed subject to our mortgage. So even though the sister owned the home, they still owed the mortgage on this mobile home, and they had signed a third-party authorization to allow us to speak with the sister about getting the account paid off. So she actually had the funds to settle the principal balance in full. And as an incentive here, we offered no arrears or late fees added to the balance. Just pay the $4,445 for a prompt payoff and everybody wins. So in this case, that's what she wanted to do. Settle the account with a full payoff, clear the title, make sure the taxes are paid going forward, and get the property back on track. So really great situation that resulted in only 4 months, $420 of expenses. And we definitely learned a lot here. First of all, internal rate of return is the time value of money. So a 4-month turnaround is a huge boon to your rate of return. Now, if we had done this over a year, the return would have only been around 70%. But because we did it in 4 months, the internal rate of return was over 200%. And that can even go higher if you're able to redeploy those funds and turn around 3 of these a year. That would have created amazing returns on an IRR basis. Now, in this situation, the tax situation is really important to understand. So in the due diligence process, understanding that those taxes had been brought current gave us a lot of confidence that basically, just like if we bought a junior and the senior is current, if we buy a senior and the taxes are current, we have a really good idea that the borrower wants to keep the property and work it out, get the loan paid off. So current taxes made us very confident in this deal as a senior lien holder. So at the end of the day, the return on investment on this one was 215% internal rate of return, with that $4,445 payoff in 4 months after spending $1,250 on the loan. Now this ROI, this does not account for the $400 of expenses on the loan, so deduct that a bit to calculate your net ROI there. All right, one more case study for us today. This is a non-performing first lien secured by vacant land, which was sold via an REO sale for $10,569. So the property was worth around $18,000 or so, we thought. Taxes were $4,620 delinquent. The equity that leaves us is $13,380, securing our UPB of $42,643. So totally underwater from everybody's perspective here. So we were able to buy this loan for $4,500, 10.5% of the unpaid principal balance, which worked out to about 33% of the equity. As we mentioned about pricing considerations on first liens, this fair market value of $18,000 really isn't that strong of a value. So 33% of the equity position is reasonable. Whereas if this property was worth $180,000, our percentage of the equity expected on this deal would be more like 50%. Accounting for the UPB, of course, to not go above the 42. So what happened on this deal? Where are we now and what do we want to do? Well, in this case, the borrower was struggling plumbing business and he was late on all of his bills. And in this case, he couldn't even handle keeping this property. So we found on title, there's a final notice and levy of tax sale received, and there was a deadline imminent. The borrower was about to lose this property to the taxes. So he was actually willing to quitclaim deed the lot back to us, but in order to do so, we required that the borrower pay the property taxes first. So essentially, this is a win-win for him because by paying the property taxes instead of owing this $42,000, he could avoid a deficiency judgment of upwards of $40,000. And we'll explain that in the takeaways a little bit more. So what does he want to do here? Well, what do we want to do really? We want to take back the deed and then sell the REO to help the borrower out. It wasn't a property he could handle retaining. This one took a long time though, 18 months and over $1,000 of expenses to get to that payoff. And some takeaways to review here. The deed in lieu of foreclosure process, DIL, or the quitclaim deed process, a QCD, can be a very useful tool for underwater borrowers to relinquish control of the property and avoid a substantial deficiency judgment. So if a borrower does not make the entire full payoff on a loan, even in a short sale process, technically the amount that they still owe is a deficiency judgment against them, or can be garnered into a judgment against them. It's still a liability that they owe. So essentially, if we sold this property for $10,000, you deduct the 10 from 42, he still owes $32,000 that we could pursue as an unsecured debt. So instead, we basically worked out a deal where we would waive the right to pursue the deficiency balance if he paid the taxes prior to deeding the property back to us. And that worked out really well in this situation. I mean, not really well because the return wasn't as strong as the last deal, but it did allow us to start from scratch with a zero tax balance when we took back that deed. So as you can see here, our leverage as an underwater lender here allowed us to compel the borrower to pay the property taxes prior to granting the deed back. So like I mentioned, instead of paying $42,000 of principal balance, or what would amount to 32 after the 10,000, all they had to do was pay $4,600 of taxes. And in this case, we would have preferred a short sale to never even take the deed to the property. But in this case, just the situation really didn't allow it. So we had to do the deed in lieu and REO sale. And it did make more sense. So you got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox as a note investor to understand which ways you can pivot based on the current situations. So not as good of an ROI on this one, only a 25% internal rate of return when you account for that long time horizon that it took to get there. So that is it for the case studies today. I do want to share with you the giveaways. If you guys would like to get on a free consultation with me, 15-minute consultation call, you can go to robbymax.youcanbook.me to get on my calendar. So please subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment with any questions or your feedback, and then get on my calendar and we can talk more. And of course, definitely want to encourage you to check out the Mortgage Note Mastermind. Our website is all free, a research for the industry. The Mastermind group is awesome for savvy entrepreneurs and eventually is going to go up to $990 per month. And then you can consult with me as well. The consulting rate just went up actually, so ignore that. But the rate for the Mortgage Note Mastermind right now is only $140 per month. and it goes up by $10 for every 3 members. Now, this is new. We did have it as 10, and this obviously hasn't been updated. Every 3 members that join, the price increases by $10. And the reason we made that change is because the group is growing so fast and so well. I mean, there's so much value that's being provided here with the new masterclass series and everything else we've got going on with the Zoom calls that it doesn't make sense to go every 10. It makes sense to go every 3. So definitely check that out, and you'll get 50% off consulting with me, which that is accurate at $250 per hour. That's 50% of my regular consulting rate for those of you not in the mastermind group. So check it out, FIXnotes.com/mastermind. And then if you're in the group, go to podio.com/FIXnotes/mastermind to get all of the back-end information to get your business up to speed. So that is it for today's episode of Be the Bank. It's always my pleasure to bring to you the industry overviews, the tech tips, the vendor reviews, the assets for sale, case studies, the giveaways, and so much more on Be the Bank on the last Wednesday of every single month. So we're gonna sign off here by taking a look at the no birds, at the fish. I'm gonna go out there, feed the fish a little something, and hopefully they'll be hungry for a little snack. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Hit me up in the comments with any questions, and get on my calendar, robbiemax.youcanbook.me. See you, everybody. Have a great day. This might be the last we see of the koi, so enjoy it. It's getting to be cold out here. They're gonna be hibernating. So say goodbye to the koi until spring, everybody. And I'll see you guys next month for another episode of Be the Bank. Later.